Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun
Welcome to Lesson 9 of the online Bhakti Shastri course, Unit 1, Bhagavad Gita, chapters 1 to 6. In Lesson 8, a little review, we were looking at the progression from chapters 3 to 6, Bhagavad Gita, and how they reflect the different rungs of the yoga ladder. We'll be analyzing that in more detail today. We were discussing how from chapter 3, from texts 10 to 16, describe how by practicing karma Kanda one gradually gets purified and comes to the platform of Gyana. And we were comparing the impersonalistic approach, which can be construed from various verses in the 4th and 5th chapter, and comparing that to Prabhupada's personal and Vaishnav perspective, and how that was very inspirational, how we can engage everything and spiritualize the material energy by utilizing everything in the service of Krishna. This is the Yukta Vairagya, philosophy of Krishna consciousness. Let's have a look at an overview of the 5th chapter. Again, the topic of Karma Yoga and Karma Sannyas, and the superiority of Karma Yoga is described in the first 6 verses. We were discussing yesterday the description of the Karma Yogi, or the Jnani, and how he's acting in material world, but because his Jnana is so developed that even though he's eating, moving, breathing, etc., he's not incurring any sinful reactions. Jnana agni dagana, because those reactions are burnt up by the fire of Jnana. This is the method of Gyana Yoga. We'll be discussing in some detail the relationship between Ishvara, Jiva and Prakriti as described in verses 13 to 16 of the 5th chapter. And also the vision of the Jnani and the Paramatmavadi. When we'll be analyzing the process of Gyana Yoga, we'll be looking at those verses 17 to 26. And also there's an introduction to Dhyana Yoga, which will be further elaborated on in the next chapter, Ashtanga Yoga, and what Prabhupada coins the term the peace formula, and the final verse in the chapter which we'll look at today. Now, an interesting philosophical issue is introduced in text number 15 of chapter 5. The translation, nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. In the purport, Prabhupada's explaining in the first paragraph that the Lord is Vibhu, or omniscient, but the living entity is Anu, or atomic. Because he is a living soul, he has the capacity to desire by his free will. The materialists may argue that if we did, why we have free will, it'd be a lot easier if we would just automatically set the default settings of loving Krishna, and in that way we wouldn't get ourselves into trouble in this material world. They even blame God for giving us this facility that we can get bewildered by. It's God's fault. It's like arguing that if there were no jails, there are no jails, there'd be no prisoners in the jails. Yes. But it's not because the government built the prison that's what caused the criminals to act in an inappropriate way. The government had no choice. Such people were not such people, because of their behavior, they lost their eligibility to wander as a free citizen, and they're forced by the government. It's not that the government wants to build the prison. And the foolish criminal, if he says, if the government hadn't built the prison, then I wouldn't have got locked up. Government had no choice. So how is it that we have free will? Krishna explains in a later verse in the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Mama eva angsha jivaloke. Mama eva angsha. Because actually we are part and parcel of God. We are a small particle of God. Achincha bed abed tattva means that we are simultaneously God and different from God. That's Mahaprabhu's philosophy. So because we are a small particle of God, then we have all of the qualities of God, which Prabhupada mentions here. The Lord is Vibhu. That means he has those qualities to an unlimited degree. And the living entities, anu, are very small. We have the same qualities, but to a very minute degree. So because God is supremely independent, we are also independent, but we have a small degree of independence. In the previous chapter, also, the same philosophical issue is discussed in verses 14 and 15 of chapter 4. Actually, from text 13 onwards, Krishna is explaining that Tasya kartanam api mam vidi ar kartanam abhyayam. This is a very interesting principle, that Tasya kartanam api mam. You should know that I am the kartaram, means I am the doer of everything, because Krishna, through his expanded energies, he is controlling everything in the world, in the creation. Mayi sarvamidam protam sutri maniganaiva. Everything is resting upon Krishna. Machstani sarva bhutani. The whole material creation, the entire material manifestation is simply the energy of Krishna. So he is the ultimate kartaram, the ultimate doer of everything. But the final line of text 13 is saying that vidi ar kartaram avyam. However, you should know, vidi, you should understand that I am akartaram. Akartaram means that I'm the non-doer. Abhyayam, being unchangeable. This is extraordinary potency that the Supreme Lord has. Everything that we do, devotees, anybody, everything we do, it affects us, it changes us. We're different after we've done it. We're affected by all of the works that we do. The Supreme Lord, however, although he's doing everything, he's so powerful that nothing he does affects him. This is his inconceivable, inexhaustible potency. Although I am the creator of the entire system, or although I am doing everything, tashakartaram abhimam vidi arkartaram abhyayam, you should know that I am the not doer. I am the non-doer, completely unaffected by everything, all of this creation. Namam karmani limpanti. There's no work that affects me. Narmam karmani limpanti. Although he is doing everything. He is controlling everything. He is creating everything. And his manifestation of the energies and all of the production of his energies, that has no effect on him in any way whatsoever. He's not at all affected by the creation of this material world to any degree. In text 14, Prabhupada gives some analogies to help us understand this. Although he is the creator of the material world, he is not affected by the activities of the material world. He creates and remains aloof from the creation. The proprietor of an establishment is not responsible for the right and wrong activities of the workers, but the workers are themselves responsible. So this analogy is helping us understand how he is sarva karana karanam. He's the cause of everything, but at the same time, you can't hold Krishna accountable for the decisions that the conditioned souls make. How is it that we're able to make decisions? Because being part and parcel of the Supreme, we have a little decision-making capacity. Because just like the parents, the symptoms and qualities of the parents, the children inherit automatically. The skin color, the eye color, etc. These things, the children audit because they're produced by the parents. So we have a little independence because he's the Supreme Independent. Or as in Australia, a vernacular saying is that he's a chip off the old block. You know that in India? A chip off the old block. A chip off the old block. That's a comment that's made when somebody's son or daughter is very much like the father. They say it's a chip off the old block. The old block is the father and the son is just like a chip. But it's an interesting analogy because it's actually a fact that we're a chip off the old Bhagawan block. He's more than a block, but all of his qualities we have to a small degree. So for that reason we have independence and we can make decisions and we can decide as an independent entity what to do with our lives, and Krishna has given us that capacity. In the same way, the proprietor of the factory, Prabhupada's describing it, the workers, an establishment, they're completely dependent upon the proprietor for whatever they do, because they get paid at the end of the month, and so in that way they're completely dependent upon the proprietor for their sustenance and for their enjoyment. But even though the proprietor is providing, he's not responsible for how they spend their money, and they're accountable, even though he's the cause. The other analogy Prabhupada gives a little further into the purport, that the rains are not responsible for the different types of vegetation. Although the vegetation is completely dependent upon rain, however, the varieties of vegetation that grow is completely independent and is not controlled by the rain, although is dependent on the rain. So in the same way, simultaneously we're completely under the control of the Lord, and we're completely dependent upon the Lord, and He's the supreme controller. However, the decisions that we make and the activities that we perform, the Supreme Lord is not accountable for those activities. In the 5th chapter, because He is a living soul, He has the capacity to desire by His free will. Such desire is fulfilled only by the omnipotent Lord. So the Lord is fulfilling the desires of the living entity by providing us, ultimately He provides us everything to fulfill our desires. He provides us the senses, the body, the sense objects, and all of the ingredients that we require for maintaining our lives. He's providing all of the facilities wherein we fulfill our material desires. Materialists are unable to understand this nature of the Lord. There's one philosophy, very, very popular philosophy for theology on the planet today. Their concept is that God, He's almost in control of everything, but there's a few little areas that He's lost control, and the devil has taken control of those. Actually, the philosophy is that in the past the devil was a good person, but he somehow or other he became a renegade, and he's become a competitor with God. This is the philosophy. And there's a few areas there that God's lost control of, and the devil has captured the control, and we have to try to, it's like an army, it's like a war, we have to ensure that we get more followers, rescue the followers of the devil, and try to protect our flock, make sure no one gets caught and gets an alliance with the devil's party. The idea is that God's not actually in control of everything. There's a certain area He's lost control of, and the devil is in control of that. And this is how they explain evil. Because otherwise, if God's in control of everything, then how does He allow evil? So not being able to understand how He can be the supreme controller and there can be suffering and evil, the philosophy of the devil has been, it's like a mythology. It's been like a speculative. It's like an imaginary story that somehow or other tries to address the complex issue. Well, there was one angel. He became bad. He became the devil, and he's causing all the trouble, and he gets in your head and makes you evil. How is that? And God's not really in control of the devil. But philosophy is very childish philosophy. God means He's in control of everything. There's nothing happens without His sanction, without His potency. And there's no question of a competitor. In fact, the Vedic literature explains that he is the Advaita. Advaitam achutam anadiman antarupam. Advaita means, Advaita is two. And Advaita means one. Advaita means without a second. So what to speak of a competitor, there is no one else apart from Krishna. There is nothing else apart from Krishna. He's everything. There is no second thing. He is everything. And simply internal and external energy, He expands and creates everything. But everything is God. So there's no question of Him not being in control of everything. So how is it that He allows suffering? How is it that He allows this misery and evil? Here Prabhupada's explaining the reason. Because He is a living soul, He has the capacity to desire by His free will. Being a part and parcel of the Supreme, we have a small amount of independence, and it's up to us how we use that. And we simply desire, and God fulfills the desires, whether they are favorable for us or unfavorable. When a living entity is bewildered in his desires, the Lord allows him to fulfill those desires. But the Lord is never responsible for the actions and reactions of the particular situation. How is it that He understands the desires of the living entity? Another interesting analogy. He can understand the desire of the individual soul as one can smell the flavor of a flower by being near it. So this is interesting, an analogy that just like when you can smell a flower, and without actually touching the flower, you can still experience the flower by the fragrance. So in the same way, without being affected by or influenced by or contaminated by the material energy or the material desires, the Lord, as Paramatma, is fully aware of the desires of the living entity, and out of His mercy, He fulfills and facilitates those desires. As Prabhupada quotes the English aphorism, man proposes and God disposes. The Lord, however, can fulfill all desires, and the Lord, being neutral to everyone, does not interfere with the desires of the minute living entities. In other words, even though the Lord doesn't interfere and allows us to desire according to our own autonomy, and even we may be desiring and behaving in ways which are detrimental for us, the Lord won't prevent us from doing that, and He will facilitate us. However, when one desires Krishna, the Lord takes special care and encourages one to desire in such a way that one attains Him and becomes eternally happy. That'll be explained in more detail in the later chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, Gyana Yoga, more confidential knowledge, where Krishna is explaining that Samoham Sarvabhuteshu, I'm equal to all living entities, as here we're explaining that He's accompanying the living entity, He's observing the desires, He's providing for and fulfilling the desires. Samoham Sarvabhuteshu Nami Dvesha Ashtina Priyaha, and I'm treating everyone equally through the energy, through the agency of the material energy. Yea, but He's saying, yea, bhajanti tu. Tu means but. Yea, bhajanti tu, mam bhaktya. Those who worship me with devotion, mai te, they're in me, te shu cha api aham. And te shu, in them, cha api, I am certainly. Prabhupada translates that they become a friend of mine and I become a friend of them. So when one practices Bhagavad Bhakti, then the Lord becomes particularly inclined to the devotee, and He actually may get involved in a very direct, He does get involved in a very direct way in influencing the devotee, as Prabhupada says. The Lord takes special care and encourages one to desire in such a way that one can attain Him and be eternally happy. The Lord becomes personally interested and influences and guides the devotee and protects the devotee from making the wrong decisions. As Prabhupada comments when he's lecturing on this topic, just like a thief, he's praying to God, my dear God, give me some opportunity, I can steal that thing. Krishna first of all says, no, don't do it, but he insists, as the person who wants to, he insists. Then Krishna says, all right, do it, but as soon as you do it, you become entangled. Why? You are doing against the will of Krishna. That is your entanglement. Krishna is giving you facility to steal others' property, but you become entangled. It's not Krishna's responsibility, it's your responsibility. He can give you permission, but the enjoyment and suffering will have to be taken by you. If you insist permission, I want to do this, and without permission you cannot do it, therefore Krishna gives you permission. All right, you do it, but at your own risk. Krishna doesn't want that you should do it, but you want to do it, therefore He gives permission. Carrying on with our examination of the Yoga ladder, in the beginning of the 6th chapter, in text number 3, Prabhupada comments, Yoga ladder, it may be compared to a ladder for attaining the topmost spiritual realization. This ladder begins from the lowest material condition of the living entity and rises up to perfect self-realization in pure spiritual life. According to various elevations, different parts of the ladder are known by different names, but all in all, the complete ladder is called yoga. So the term yoga ladder is a term originally coined by His Divine Grace. And Prabhupada's explaining, when he's lecturing on the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, how one gradually progresses from one rung of the yoga ladder to the next. Yes, the gradual progress of yoga system, karma yoga to Gyana Yoga. Karma yoga means fruitive activity, pious activity, or prescribed activities. And karma, prescribed activities, means according to your varna, ashram, dharma. Varna and ashram dharma, that's called prescribed activities. And performing those activities without any attachment to enjoying the result is called karma yoga. Then by performing karma yoga, one comes to the platform of Gyana Yoga, knowledge. And from knowledge to this Ashtanga Yoga, that's Dhyana Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga meditation, eightfold yoga system, which we'll be discussing in the next lesson in more detail. And then from Ashtanga Yoga, concentrating the mind on Vishnu, come to the point of Bhakti Yoga. This is the gradual process. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, the various verses are given wherein Krishna is describing how specifically one progresses from the respective rungs of the yoga ladder to the subsequent rungs, and you can research and consider those specific references in your own time. We will discuss some of these in some detail now. Actually, Karma Kanda to Karma Yoga, we were discussing yesterday how by below Karma Kanda is, below Karma, or Karma Kanda, is called Vikarma. And technically speaking, the Vikarma is not on the ladder, because if you act in an irregular, sinful way, then you won't actually make progress. You'll be heading in a downwards direction to the animal species. Jagannaguna Brijishto Adho Gachanti. Adho Gachanti. You go down. Adho means down. Adho Gachanti Tamasaha. If you're influenced by the lower modes, and you're influenced by the lower modes means that you have no consideration of the right and wrong and the consequences. You're simply acting according to the impulses of the senses without discrimination. That's actually animal. That's how animals function. They don't consider, is this right or wrong? Simply they're impelled to respond to the urges of the senses. So that's a platform of vikarma, a sinful life. And many who have attained the human form of life are practically speaking on the platform of vikarma, animal existence, because they're not considering consequences for their behavior, and they're not considering the seriousness, and therefore they're behaving in an irresponsible way, and they can be degraded. So the platform of Karma Kanda is that one is not behaving in an irresponsible way. One is simply enjoying the world by paying the necessary dues of the Vedic sacrificial performances, worshipping the demigods, performing yagyas, performing the prescribed duties, following the duties, in that way achieving, acquiring, accumulating pious credits because of following the regulative systems and procedures, accumulating pious credits which will produce happiness and prosperity in one's life. That's called Karma Kanda. And it's a life of sinlessness, a religious life, a pious life. And by acting in that way, as we were discussing in the previous lesson, one gradually comes to the platform of Gyana and begins to see beyond the simple achievements of temporary material happiness, and begins to consider the eternality of the soul and how to attain eternal liberation. That's the platform of Gyana Yoga. Discussing in our analysis of the second chapter, Karma Yoga means that, as Krishna is encouraging Arjuna to perform, one carries on with the prescribed duties of the Varna and Ashram system, but performs those duties without an intention or an objective of getting the punya, but simply performs those duties because it's one's duty. Palam chaktva manishina jogashta kuru karmani sangam chaktva. Jogashta kuru karmani, you do your prescribed duties, which in general are done for the purpose of acquiring piety and punya. Jogashta kuru karmani sangam chaktva. But abandon attachment to the result. Siddha siddha samobhutva samatang yoga uchite. Samatva, become equipoised, become detached, become dutiful, and simply perform your prescribed duties in that way. Samatam yoga uchite. This is called yoga. It's called Karma Yoga. Now, Prabhupada is explaining that if one performs Karma Yoga, if one carries on performing his prescribed duties in the Varna and Ashram system without any intention to enjoy the sukriti, the punya, which is accrued from those activities, then gradually he develops gyan. Prabhupada mentions activities performed in full knowledge strengthen one's advancement in real knowledge. That means when Prabhupada says activities performed in full knowledge, that means Gyana Yoga, because one's performing the activities with full knowledge that he's not the enjoyer. So by acting in a way, that action, it produces, it strengthens, Prabhupada says, it strengthens. In other words, one progresses towards real knowledge, or gyan. Real knowledge means it begins to realize that I'm not in the material body. When Karma Yoga increases in knowledge and renunciation, the stage is called Gyana Yoga. So in this way, by practicing Karma Yoga, by properly performing one's prescribed duties without any interest to be the enjoyer of those acquired sukriti, pious results, by acting in that way, one gradually advances in self-realization, and when reaches the point where it's no longer required for the person to perform the prescribed duties of the Varna and Ashram system, then they can rely on their Gyan to keep them in touch with the Supreme, and that's called Gyana Yoga. In text 50 of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains, Jogo Karnamashu Koshalam. Now, Koshal means the art. Prabhupada translate that the art of work. This is actually, Karma Yoga is actually the ideal work. And it is particularly recommended for the person that is inclined to act, so that by your works, by your activities, you can perfect your life. You can act perfectly. This is Karma Yogi. By perfect activity, you can connect to the Supreme. And in that way, one is very much engaged, actively. That's called Karma Yoga. And in general, that's suited for most conditioned souls because we're very much inclined to act according to the way that the modes of material nature are influencing us. Of course, as we'll be discussing in subsequent lessons, bhakti includes all of this and can be done in a much easier way than Karma Yoga. However, Krishna is building up to that step by step. So he's recommending Karma Yoga. And then by your perfection of work, Jogo Karma Shukoshalam, by the art of work, you can live a sinless life, you can live a perfect life, and you can attain perfection. Now, the next rung, Krishna is explaining, one comes to a platform of Gyan, where it's no longer the activity, or the perfect activity, or the perfectly detached activity, which is the means by which you are connecting to the Supreme. Rather, it is your perception of the difference between the temporary and the eternal. And being able to see that difference and never forgetting that, one is able to be connected into the Supreme through yoga. That's called Gyana Yoga. Prabhupada's explaining. Gyana Yoga means to keep in touch with the Supreme by speculation of higher knowledge. That is, discriminating what is spirit and what is matter. In the purport to text 46 of chapter 6, Prabhupada's explaining, when the linking process is predominantly empirical, it's called Gyana Yoga. And what does empirical mean? An interesting word. Prabhupada uses the word very specifically, empirical. The Oxford Dictionary explains that empiricism or empirical means by observation, based on observation. So the predominantly empirical process means that by seeing, by remembering, by realizing, it's actually realized. Gyanavan, a Gyani, he's realized. Gyan, he's actually realized that material things are temporary, and I am not temporary, and therefore the inherent incompatibility of the soul with the material energy. A verse which very clearly explains the process of Gyana Yoga is in the 5th chapter, text number 22. Yehi Shanks Passage bhoga dukkha yonaya evate adyantavanta kunteya nateshu ramate buddha. Here the Gyani is being mentioned or referred to with that last word, Buddha. And Buddha yogi, Gyani. One who has Gyan, who has knowledge. So Yehi Shanks Passage bhoga. Bhoga means enjoyment, and the Shanks Passage bhoga, that means that Shanks Passage is produced from Shangspasa, means the senses when they come in contact with their objects. So here we are currently, it's the summer season in India. When we turn on the AC and we're in the cool room, we get some bhoga, we get some enjoyment. That's called Sangspasha Ja bhoga. That's bhoga, Sangspasha Ja is born from the Shangspasha. The contact, Shang means to complete, to fulfill, Shangspasha. Spasha means touching, when the senses come in contact with their objects. There is some pleasure. Shangspasha Ja bhoga. Enjoyment which is produced from the senses contacting their objects. When the eyes, they see beauty. When the ears, they hear sweet sound. When the tongue tastes pleasant, the pleasant tastes, etc., etc. All of the senses and all the sense objects, when there's connection, it's called Sangspasha Ja bhoga. Material life simply means producing opportunities for Sangspasha Ja bhoga. Now Krishna is explaining that dukkha yonaya evate. Dukkha yoni means the place where misery is generated. A yoni, the womb of dukkha, of suffering. Dukkha yoni, eva, certainly. It's quite a confrontational principle that Krishna is disseminating and revealing to all of humanity in this verse. That happiness that we get from the pleasures of the senses, Krishna says that is the source of misery. Of course, the material, we can't see that. We can't see the connection between the two. That's the illusory energy. We cannot see the connection, how my misery is directly a response to my enjoying the senses. And because we can't see the connection, we don't quite get the equation right. And we're thinking still that I have all the suffering, then more sense gratification will actually solve the problem of suffering. But we don't understand that the more sense gratification is actually dukkha yoni. It's not my opinion. Take it or leave it. Or learned Vaishnava theologians, you can take it or leave it, but Krishna is saying dukkha yonaya eva. And just in case you're perhaps thinking, well, maybe not in all cases, he says eva, certainly, is unquestionable. So the Jnani realizes this. Now, how is it that is dukkha yoni? How can it be dukkha yoni? It seems to me to be sukha yoni, the place of generating pleasure. How can it be dukkha yoni? It's dukkha yoni in the next line, Krishna explains, because adi antavanta, kunteya, oh kunteya, because that type of Shanks Passage bhoga, it begins adi and anta, it ends. Adi antavat is the antavat. It has a beginning and it has an end. And for that reason, na teshu, the Jnanis, ramate, na teshu ramate. The Buddha, the Jnanis, they don't get any pleasure from the material sense enjoyment because they understand that it's not permanent pleasure. It ends. And when it ends, then immediately there's suffering. Perhaps you've had the experience of watching a movie. Of course, now watching movies is such an easy thing. You don't even need to go to the movie theater as we did when we were kids, or even tune in to the TV at the right time. You just whenever you want. You can be on Netflix and this one and the movies. Much easier now. At the end of the movie, there's the credits. They come, credits, and the movie's finished. For a while there, you were a great hero in the army, and you were killing so many of the enemies, and so many ladies were in love with you, and you were so famous. And then the movie finishes, and it's like, oh, you immediately feel back to normal life. You know, let's watch another movie. Watch another movie, just like in the airplane. You see the in-flight entertainment. People watch one movie after another. As soon as the first movie finishes, immediately let's start the next one. Right? Because we're back to the mundane, suffering life as soon as the sense enjoyment finishes. And actually, we feel more of a hankering. We feel more desire. We feel more of a need for sense gratification. I was living in Bangladesh, Dhaka, in our temple there for several years, and interesting to a phenomena that in Bangladesh, the simple village people, for some reason, they're crazy about football, soccer, and you go to the remote villages and many days traveling in Nauka. Nauka is a boat and through the jungle, and you come out to the villages there, and they have big banners of Ronaldo and Argentina and Brazil. Somehow, for some reason, remote jungle in Bangladesh, they're completely enamored by World Cup soccer. So I think it's FA Cup. It's every 4 years, FA Cup. I think it's FA Cup, World Cup. So the final was in Europe somewhere, and they were broadcasting in Dhaka. So it was in the middle of the night. The broadcast came on, a World Cup final. And we were already asleep by that time in the Brahmacharya ashram, but naturally we were woken up as we heard all the televisions turning on at the same time, simultaneously. It was a rather cramped neighborhood, and we were completely surrounded by apartments. And so we could hear the whole of Dhaka. This was at 12 o'clock at night. The whole of Dhaka, they're watching the FA Cup final. And as the ball is going from one end of the sports field to the other, we could hear all of the residents of Dhaka in like harmonious a chorus as they were cheering. As the ball would come to the close to the goal, they're all, oh, yes, oh, and they're cheering, yes, yes, yes. And then all of a sudden, those of you who have lived in India, Asia for any extensive period of time, you know there's a problem there with electricity. In Bangla they say, current choli giyeche. Current choli giyeche. It means the current went off someplace. It means there's no power. Power cuts out. So as we're all listening, and the ball's in one end of the field, and they're all screaming and cheering on, yes, yes, and then all of a sudden, black. The whole of Dhaka, black. Boom. The current goes out. And then one simultaneous, harmonious chorus of expression of pain and wailing, as the whole of the city of Dhaka were calling out in a cry of anguish when the TV went black, just as the ball was running close to the goal and Ronaldo was there and TV goes black. And the whole of Dhaka in one simultaneous cry we could hear. They were suffering. They were suffering. But actually we weren't suffering. We weren't suffering. We weren't crying out in pain. Because we weren't dependent. We're not relying upon that connection to senses with their objects. In that case, looking at the sports on the TV. It comes to an end. It comes to an end, and it's not enough. The senses cannot provide enough for what the soul requires. The soul requires sukham akshayam, happiness that doesn't end. The soul, being inherently spiritual by nature, it requires spiritual happiness. It requires spiritual pleasure to actually fully satisfy the self. Brahma Joga Juktatma. This is actually a verse, the next verse, 521. We're discussing here 522, the previous verse. Brahma Joga Juktatma. Shukam Akshayam Ashnute. This is actually what the soul is hankering for. The Shukam Akshay, the unlimited Shuk. The unlimited happiness that never decreases, that gets better and better and better. That's the spiritual happiness. And that comes, how do we achieve that? Akshay Shuk, Shabrahma Joga Jukta. Shabrahma Joga Jukta. By connecting to the supreme source of pleasure, the Supreme Lord, through Bhakti Yoga. So the Jnani, because he sees in the beginning that the materialist who is agyan, he's in ignorance, he cannot see the suffering which is inherently connected to all of the objects of sense enjoyment. They can't see the suffering, and Maya actually presents it in such a way as being a good deal. And that's the illusory potency of Maya. We become bewildered. And the Agyani, the materialist, they cannot see that, and simply they're going from one type of happiness to the next, one type of happiness to the next, and in this way trying to find that Akshay Shuk, unlimited spiritual happiness, which is always evading them in the material world. So the Jnani, because he recognizes that this source of the sense gratificatory activities, because they have an end, therefore, nateshu ramate. He does not initiate those activities in the first place, because it just produces suffering. So better I don't try and enjoy those things, and therefore I can remain free from being victimized by the guaranteed suffering, which is connected to every type of sense enjoyment available. So this is Gyana Yoga, and in this way the Jnani, he restrains himself from the activities of the senses and minimizes the sensual activities as much as possible. Shariram Kevalam Karma, as we were discussing earlier in the 5th chapter, Shariram Kevalam, he simply utilizes the senses as much as required to keep the body and soul together, and doesn't use the senses as a means of providing enjoyment, and in this way he remains connected to the Supreme. This is Gyana Yoga. Prabhupada's explaining in the purport to the 47th verse of the 6th chapter that when Gyana Yoga increases in meditation on the Supersoul by different physical processes, and the mind is on him, it is called Ashtanga Yoga. So we were explaining Gyana Yoga, the empirical method of constantly remembering the misery of material enjoyment, and therefore remaining detached and remaining aloof, remaining in the transcendental position by Gyan, by accumulated knowledge. The practice of Dhyana Yoga is actually specifically meditation, where one will visualize by the meditative processes, which we'll be describing and discussing in the next lesson, by the meditative procedures of Ashtanga Yoga Sadhana, by the particular practical methods, the mechanical techniques of visualization, internal meditation. One can visualize the form of the Supersoul in the heart, and that's called Dhyana Yoga. So in this way, we've been discussing the yoga ladder from Karma Kanda. One gradually carries on with the prescribed duties, but performs those duties in a detached way. That's Karma Yoga. And as we mentioned in text 51 of the 2nd chapter, Krishna does explain by selfless, by detached work, one actually gets Janma Bandha Vinena Mukta, so we have the dotted line there going to Brahman realization. But practically speaking, that Brahman realization will be achieved when one comes to the platform of Gyana, when one comes to the platform of Gyan and becomes fully Gyanavan, and fully conversant, and fully realized his eternal nature, he can enter the Brahman. And that's described in the previous verse in text number 19 of chapter 5. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the condition of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman, and thus they are already situated in the Brahman. Now, Krishna will go on to describe in the next chapter that Gyana Yoga, which we will describe in more detail in the next lesson, and also Paramatma realization is described, and there also how the Paramatma realized Dhyana Yogi can also begin the practice of Bhakti Yoga, and this is the gradual process of the Yoga ladder. Now, we may consider, well, why Krishna is going through these different steps of the Yoga ladder, why he doesn't when Arjuna is bewildered on the battlefield in the first chapter, and Arjuna gives his arguments. Why at that time Krishna didn't just say, why he didn't say then, Yat Koroshi Tat Kurusha Madarpanam, you should fight for me because it will please me, you are my servant, I'm God, and this is the constitutional position, you remember me and fight. Why he didn't just say that in the beginning of the third chapter? Because, as Prabhupada mentions here in the purport to 647, factually Bhakti Yoga is the ultimate goal, but to analyze Bhakti Yoga minutely, one has to understand these other yogas. So actually Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and as we mentioned in the first few lessons of the Unit 1, that he's appearing in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Dharma Sangstapanataya, for the purpose of Sangstapanataya, for completely establishing the science of Dharma. So for that reason, Krishna, he explains all of the various options to the living entities in the standard, including the gradual process, and that includes the Varnashram Dharma and gradual piety, and then Gyana Yoga, and then Ashtanga Yoga. So all of these processes are bona fide processes, and one can practice. However, we'll see toward the end of the 6th chapter, which we'll be discussing in a couple of lessons, that Krishna does make a personal conclusion. He says that Sradavan bhajate jomam same jukta utam mataha. That mataha, in my opinion, same jukta utam, the jukta utam, the topmost yogi, or as Prabhupada explains, the highest yogi, is the Sradavan bhajate jomam, the one who, with faith, worships me in Bhakti Yoga. So in order to explain how he's Jukta Uttam, how Bhakti is the topmost yoga system, in order to make that claim, in order to establish this principle, Bhakti is the topmost yoga system, the other yoga systems also have to be explained so that it becomes apparent that Bhakti is the topmost. For that reason, Krishna is in detail explaining the principles of the subsequent yoga systems. In addition to understanding Bhakti ourselves through our own practice, also understanding the different components of the yoga ladder can contribute in a major way to our effectiveness in preaching Krishna consciousness. Because by analysis we can see that the types of people that we meet in our preaching, generally their concept of spirituality or self-realization is one or idea or some sort of a mixture of these different concepts of the yoga ladder. And you can see the elements of the yoga ladder in the predominant religious practices in the world. For example, in Christianity, you can see a strong influence of karma yoga by work. And therefore you see that the Christian nuns and the Christian priests and the Christian charity workers very much were interested in pious works, opening hospitals, caring for the sick, opening orphanages, etc. There's a Christian ethics. Because by work, it's selfless work. This is a strong influence of karma yoga, actually. I'm doing this to show my love for God. I'm showing my love for God by serving humanity. Okay, that's karma yoga. There's also influences of karma kanda. That particularly if we're talking about the aspiration to go to heaven, that I serve God in this life and I will go to heaven in the next life, That's actually, according to the Vedic concept, there's a karma kanda approach, because svaga dvaram apavritam, Krishna says that the doors of heaven open up for one who performs their prescribed duties and doesn't deviate from those. So that's also karma kanda. When we're talking about the profit in the next life of going to heaven, that's the influence of karma kanda, karma yoga. And there is, of course, the nihilistic philosophies and the philosophies of Gyan, voidism and monism, nirvishesha shunyavad. They're influenced by Gyan, that we're not the body, that all of the variety in this world is illusory. And so either people are in either of these categories. They're either into work or do something valuable for humanity, or else they're into the oneness and the supreme energy and impersonalism. So by understanding the different processes of the yoga ladder, then it makes it very a lot more relevant when we're discussing. We can discuss with such aspirants when we're in our preaching in a much more relevant way, because actually the processes that they are following are clearly explained by the Supreme Authority himself in Bhagavad Gita. What are those processes, and scientifically how they can be done in a clearer way than basically what people, their own conception of their own process is. Another common approach we see is a mix. I visited different yoga ashrams in Rishikesh and different places for learning Hatha Yoga for health. And we lived in ashrams, and you can see it's a standard program, is that the daily program will be a little mix of everything. There'll be some Gyana Yoga mixed in the morning, some philosophy, and then there'll be some Karma Yoga when you go and have to go and pull the weeds out of the garden. And then there'll be some bhakti, there'll be some bhajan and chant, and this way the yoga schools are thinking that by a little of everything, then we'll be making progress. So in all such situations, having a clear understanding of the yoga ladder, their respective rungs, the respective yoga processes, practically speaking, how they can be performed in the genuine and authorized way, and how they gradually lead to the next rung. And then ultimately, as we'll be describing in a study of chapter 6, how all of these different processes are designed to actually lead one to the platform of devotional service and bhakti. And how by practicing bhakti yoga, it includes the achievements that are available through all of the different yoga, preliminary yoga processes. In that way, one can become very convinced about the practice of bhakti yoga. And for that reason, Krishna is taking the time to describe all of these different processes in detail. The concluding verse of the 5th chapter is a very regularly quoted verse by Srila Prabhupada. Bhaktaram jagatapasam savalokam maheshwaram shuridam Sharavabhutanam Gyatvamam Shantim Richati. Gyatvamam Shantim Richati. Gyatvamam, those who are conscious of me, Gyatvamam, getting knowledge of me, Shantim, you get peace. Prabhupada describes it, he summarizes his verse as the peace formula. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs and the material miseries. Prabhupada's commenting, the conditioned souls within the clutch of the illusory energy are all anxious to attain peace in the material world, but they do not know the formula for peace, which is explained in this part of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is explaining that he's Suridam. Suridam means the friend in the heart. Suridam. Surit. Prabhupada's explaining what kind of a friend. Krishna says, I am Suridam Sarvabhutanam. Surit. He wants you shall be happy. He wants how you shall be happy. This is Surit. This is a real friend. Mitra, social friendship. Bandhu, official friendship. But Surit. Surit means one who actually desires good for his friend. So this is Krishna. He's our real friend. Thakur Bhaktivinoda sings that Ami bina bandhu ado ke ache to umara. Ami bina. Mahaprabhu is singing, but besides me, Ami bina bandhu ado. What friend you have? Ke ache to umara. Eneche oshod. Maya nashi bado lage. I bought the medicine by which you can completely destroy the illusion of the material energy. Harinama Mahamantra lao tumi mage. I beg you, lao tumi. I'm begging you. Harinama Mahamantra lao, you take this Mahamantra. He's our greatest friend. A sincere friend, which you describe in English. So Krishna is Surit. He's always expecting my good. How I shall be good. Therefore he is canvassing me. Please, you surrender unto me. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. In lesson 8, we were discussing who's responsible for the suffering of the living entity with reference to verses from the 4th and 5th chapter. We were discussing the yoga ladder, the different rungs on the yoga systems, how one respectively progresses from one level of yoga ladder practice to the next level. In lesson 8, we were discussing the interesting philosophical issue of the cause of suffering. Why that's particularly interesting is because quoting this issue, the educated people, based on this concept, they dismiss God. Based on the fact that we see suffering in this world, that refutes the Judeo-Christian concept that He's the Supreme Lord. And otherwise, if He's the Supreme Lord, how is it that He permits the suffering? Either He's kind of got a weird masochist kind of side to Him, or He's not the Supreme and there's a competitor who's gradually taking power away from Him. And these, not understanding the cause of suffering, educated people, they become atheists. And so this is a very important issue to understand. Who's responsible for the suffering? Living entities. Why are we responsible? Because we've been given independence, which we misuse. Why are we given independence? Because we're part and parcel of the supreme independence. So by default, we have some independence. And we have to learn how to utilize that properly. And therefore, Krishna, He facilitates whatever desires we have. But if we take interest in becoming His devotee, then He'll take special interest in us and even help encourage us by protecting us from the inappropriate decisions. We were discussing the yoga ladder in detail, the different stages of the yoga ladder, and how one process leads to the next and how they link together. We were discussing the results of practicing the yoga at those different levels, and we also were discussing how modern religious practices and theological approaches and philosophical concepts in general are pretty much just a combination of the different processes that Krishna describes in the yoga ladder. And we were discussing the peace formula and its significance for us as practitioners of Bhakti Yoga. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.